25 miles outside Shanghai is one of China's most significant scientific establishments. Here they make lasers and fire them into the night sky. In laser technology, the Chinese are now only 2 years behind the West. Some say only 6 months, and gaining fast. 7 years ago, China didn't have a laser industry at all. But then the government decided to pour money into science. Now, nuclear fusion, bioengineering, computers and high-powered lasers are all under development. Here, they're firing laser beams at a Chinese satellite to determine its position. It all looks much as it would in the West, and yet Chinese science was historically quite different. For 3,000 years, the Chinese understood the universe another way. Every culture on Earth has asked the same questions. How did life begin? What forces drive and regulate the natural world? The Chinese asked themselves another question. How can man get into harmony with the universe? It's dawn on the top of Qingcheng Mountain in Sichuan province. Every morning at the Pavilion of the Echoes, a Taoist monk, Master Zhang, performs a sword exercise to compose his mind for the day ahead. Master Zhang is teaching young Taoist novices. They will learn from his example how to achieve a perfect sense of balance. Balance is a central concept in Chinese philosophy. Another monk, Master Fu, practices Qigong, deep breathing. This increases the qi, the energy level in his body. Qi, meaning vital energy, is another central idea in Chinese thought. Traditionally, the Chinese believe that the energy you feel in your body is the same energy that drives all of nature and powers the heavens above. It's the pulsing rhythm of the whole universe. To the Taoist, the landscape is alive. Nature is a giant energy field. The Tao means the way or the path you must follow to understand it. Ideally, the heavens, the earth and man are all in balance, in perfect harmony. If something gets out of balance, then the flow of energy is blocked. Your body gets tired, a plant doesn't grow. This view of reality was not confined to Taoist monks. Most of the Chinese people throughout history have understood the universe this way. Today, the traditional view is still taught by the few Taoist priests that are left.
2000年以前呀，在这个老子我们的战国时候，春秋末，老子就对道德有个全面的阐述就提出了一个《道德经》。
What's significant in these teachings is not that they're religious or even picturesque, but that they're based on an understanding of the natural world that's as old as Chinese culture itself.
无痕是讲的金木水火土嘛。比如是水，它的本性是下沉；火的本性是上，水火既济，是我的生成。
The Chinese believed there was a balance in nature between two equal and opposite forces called yin and yang. There was feminine and masculine, water and fire, dark and light, and so on. The ancient Chinese Book of Changes, the Yi Jing, was based on the concept of yin balancing yang. This is the yin-yang symbol, half light, half dark. Heaven, the sky, is the lightest, brightest, most yang thing in the universe. Earth is the darkest, the most yin. Everything else is somewhere in between. This symbol represents water. Water is very yin. It trickles downward, quietly, receptively. What he's drawing now is the symbol for the wind. Wind is active, relentless, more yang, more masculine. The Book of Changes taught the Chinese that change was inevitable. It proposed that changes happened when the yin and yang moved out of balance. This is an idea which still governs one aspect of everyday life in China. To this day, the Chinese analyze personal illness in terms of too much yin or too much yang in the body. By eating the right things, they believe, you can put yourself back in harmony with the universe. Every so often, a group sets out from the monastery to gather herbs. They'll spend half a day on the mountain, looking for plants that will balance the yin and yang of their body and restore natural energy. Holistic medicine has been understood for at least 4,000 years in China. A great selection of herbs can be found growing wild if you know where to look. Most valuable, and best known in the West, is ginseng. Ginseng is said to increase the yang element of the body, to heat it up, improve blood circulation, and most importantly for some, to increase male potency. But there are many other roots and plants to be found here on Qingcheng Mountain. It might have been expected that the Chinese communists wanted to eradicate these ancient beliefs in herbal remedies and yin and yang, but not so. Chinese traditional medicine turned out to be cheap and effective. 20 years ago, the barefoot doctor became a feature of communist China. Today they do have shoes and carry some Western antibiotics. But many of the treatments they bring to the villages are rooted in traditional Chinese medicine. Here on Qingchun Mountain, just below the monastery, Dr. Liu visits a grandmother with chronic bronchitis, a problem that's perhaps not helped by the doctor's smoking. Cigarettes aren't yet seen as a major health problem in China. Chinese doctors set great store by taking the pulse and observing the patient's qi se, literally the way their energy looks. Dr. Liu prescribed Western antibiotics this time and dispensed them on the spot. If the family need herbs as well, they'll gather them from the mountains. But keeping healthy, balancing the yin and the yang, aren't just the preoccupations of monks and countryfolk. This man lives 40 miles south in Chengdu city, and health is his livelihood. He's a cook at the Tongrentang restaurant, preparing dishes that carefully balance the customer's yin and yang, and preparing them in great quantity. This is, surprisingly, a Chinese health food restaurant. If you can't afford the prices in the main restaurant, a takeaway service is available. Chicken and duck cooked in special herbs from the mountains. You bring your prescriptions and pay in advance. At the pharmacy counter, you can buy extract of lung grass or deer antler and increase your yang at home. But the claim to fame of the Tongrentang is its restaurant and kitchens. Here, the aim is to create dishes which will prevent or cure any illness known to man. Constipation, impotence, asthma, high blood pressure, hair loss. There's something on the menu of the Tongrentang for everyone. Some of the ingredients are hard to believe, but they claim they're effective. The elixir of life is not yet on offer, but a number of old men attribute their longevity to careful balancing of yin and yang in their meals. When you visit the restaurant, you first tell them your ailment. The menu lists the dishes under the disease they cure. Some are general tonics that increase the yin, like duck with caterpillar grass. This is not to everyone's taste. The garnishing is an insect, real caterpillars. The manager is pleased to explain things to new customers. Some of the customers find the dish faintly disquieting, but the idea of yin and yang is as familiar to them as anything could be. It's curious for a Western visitor to find caterpillars or fungus or snake on a restaurant menu. It's even more of a shock to visit a modern hospital down the road and find displays of stuffed monkeys. These specimens seem fit for an alchemist's cell rather than a hospital. But none of this is a surprise for the Chinese. There's a hospital of traditional medicine in every large town. Medical students are taught that everything on this table will add yang to the body's balance. Iron filings, sulfur, horseflies, monkey brain, dried body of leech, alligator, anteater scales, even hedgehog skin. Among other things, they seem to increase blood pressure, alleviate rheumatism, and help prevent bladder disorders. It's easy to scoff at Chinese traditional medicine. After all, what can hedgehog do for rheumatism? But many Western cures were once derived from natural substances. It's not as strange as it seems. In the last 20 years, experiments at medical institutes in Shanghai have isolated potent extracts from traditional remedies. New birth control drugs like anordrin and gossypol have been successfully developed from plants. Naturally occurring anti-cancer agents have been isolated. Some of the old cures really work. Laboratory chemistry is nothing new to the Chinese, of course. It was developed over 1,000 years ago by alchemists searching for the elixir of life. From the chemical experiments of the alchemists came one of the classic inventions of China, gunpowder. This is a replica of an early rocket-assisted arrow, designed around the time of the Battle of Hastings and used by both sides in the Chinese-Mongol Wars. The invention of gunpowder was evidently an explosive accident. Alchemists were fond of mixing up sulfur and saltpeter in their attempts to achieve immortality. Some achieved it sooner than they'd intended. Some say the Chinese used gunpowder only for fireworks shows. Not so. This is a 13th century design for a kind of V-2 rocket. The bird projected itself over the enemy, then fell down to earth and exploded in their camp. Nowadays, things like military rockets are dealt with by the ministries of machine building in Beijing. Other matters which might have interested ancient alchemists are pursued in places like this, the Institute of Biochemistry in Shanghai. They developed the world's first artificial insulin here in 1965. Recently, a nucleic acid, which is biologically active, tRNA, was synthesized by this team. This bioengineering work rivals any in the world. But Chinese science is still not entirely the same as Western science. In spite of advances in Western medicine, they're still building new hospitals of traditional medicine in China, and patronage of them is still increasing, to the point where some hospitals find it hard to cope with demand. The Chengdu Traditional Hospital deals with 1,500 patients a day on average. 60 doctors are on call, and everyone gets treated in large communal groups. No private consulting rooms here. People can choose whether to be treated at the Western-style hospital or in this one. It's a matter of taste. They surely wouldn't submit to traditional treatment if it didn't work. The question is, how does it work? For example, how can it help rheumatism in the leg to put hot jars on the back? When you push a needle into a little girl's arm, how is that going to help her stomach? A traditional Chinese doctor sets out to understand the whole human being who confronts him. This man's problem is his leg, or so it would appear initially. But he's under stress, not helped by the time it took him to register earlier on and get an appointment. Although the final treatment will be local and often very much to the point, the initial approach is to the well-being of the whole person. Is he well? Does he look well? Chinese medicine sees the human body as a complete organism. The mind and the body are not separate. That's particularly true of acupuncture. Here, a 90-year-old grandmother is about to have an eye operation. The only anesthetic, 2 vibrating needles. While she's still fully conscious, a cataract will be removed from each eye. Some Westerners say that acupuncture is a theatrical effect, like dressing up in white coats. It's auto-suggestion. The patients just think they feel no pain. But ask yourself, would you allow a scalpel to slice into both your eyes while you were fully conscious with no painkiller? The operation is a complete success. With the patient still conscious, the doctor is able to ask her, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And she's able to answer correctly, after being blind for 5 years. But there are still doubts about acupuncture in the minds of Western scientists. So the Chinese have developed some disarmingly simple experiments to prove their point. They paint a heat-absorbing liquid on a rabbit's nose. The animal is suspended opposite a lamp, which is then turned on. How long can the rabbit stand the heat of the lamp on its nose? Six or 7 seconds on average. Now, a needle will be inserted in the rabbit's hind leg at a place that roughly corresponds to a similar point on the human body. Sorting out the pain-killing acupuncture points on animals is not easy, but you soon know if you've been successful. With the needle, the rabbit lasts not 6 seconds, but 12. To understand how and why acupuncture works isn't easy. It's based on an understanding of the human body that goes back at least 1,000 years. Models and charts have been developed to show how mysterious energy lines join the primary acupuncture points. This simply makes no sense to Western doctors. But one thing is significant. Most of the points correspond with important nerve junctions, as we know them. It may be that acupuncture needles stimulate one nerve, which in turn overrides the pain signals coming in from another. In China, however, they explain it differently. They say that energy is meant to flow freely between our various organs and limbs. If yin and yang get unbalanced, then the energy flow is blocked. Cupping with hot glass jars is meant to release the energy flow. This patient has a chronic bladder defect, so jars were placed near the kidneys, as you might expect. But in addition, a needle is inserted in the back of the patient's calf. According to the acupuncture map, an energy line or meridian connects this point with the bladder. A problem with the bladder means too much water, too much yin, and that can lead to rheumatism. To prevent that, a third point on the sole of the foot is stimulated with glowing cigars made from the moxa plant. This will add yang and finally bring the body back into balance. That's the Chinese explanation. The government prefers to stress the scientific basis of traditional Chinese medicine, but no one can deny that it's rooted in ancient philosophy. Above the doctor is a wall chart that reminds the patient of the connection between her energy and that of the cosmos. The message is that the same qi drives the sun and moon as drives her. Her yin and yang should be balanced as should the yin and yang of earth. Chinese medicine is based on the belief that man is indissolubly linked to the energies and rhythms of heaven and earth. To understand yourself, they say, try understanding the cosmos a different way. The Chinese believed that all parts of the universe were interrelated. They spoke of the body as if it were a landscape. Acupuncture points were given names like bubbling spring, penetrating valley, great mountain stream. So it followed that they saw a landscape as if it were a human body. The mountains were the bone structure, the soil was the skin, rivers were blood vessels. One should respect the earth as if it were one's own body. Some places on earth, as on the body, had special power. These places were like acupuncture points on the body of the earth. The first brick pagodas in China, for all the world like acupuncture needles, were placed in one of these special points in Henan province. They believed the most favorable place to build a temple or a tomb was the point where the flow of energy in the earth was best balanced and therefore most powerful. Finding a good site to build a monument became an art, the art of feng shui. In communist China, it's now frowned on. But when the authorities reconstruct a temple, they take care to see that the original alignment is not altered. Some points on the map are said to have very good feng shui. This tree down the road from the temple has lived for more than 2,000 years. They say it's very well sited, just south of a great mountain. It shelters the students of China's oldest school, the Songyang Academy. For most of the last 1,500 years, pupils have been taught science and philosophy on this site. If a Westerner had been taught 1,000 years ago that the Earth had invisible lines of force underneath the surface, it's likely he wouldn't have believed it. But as it happens, the Chinese were right. The Earth does have invisible lines of energy. And they're explained today in every classroom in China. We call them magnetism. The Chinese conceived of the idea of force lines in the Earth long before they proved their existence with magnets. But the concept fitted into their cosmology perfectly. South was yang, north was yin, another pair of balanced opposites. The West had known that some metals were naturally attractive, the lodestone, for example. But it took the Chinese to realize the directional properties of the magnet. They invented the compass 100 years before the Europeans. Magnetism was one example of the living energy of the Earth. But were there others? Indeed there were. If the Earth was a body, with rivers like arteries and magnetic lines like acupuncture meridians, then it followed that the Earth, like a body, could get ill, out of balance. But how could you tell when this was happening? Chinese peasants have always been close to the earth and to their animals. Chinese scientists have always noted down natural phenomena. Eventually, a connection was made between the strange behavior of animals and the occurrence of natural disasters. To this day, herds of deer are monitored. If they're off their food or unusually nervous, an earthquake may be imminent. Herds of deer provide just one example. Other people note the laying habits of their chickens, the level of their wells, the curious cries of foxes out of season. This is a village schoolmaster. If his family notices anything unusual, he'll contact the local office of the Bureau of Seismology. It may be the crucial first sign of a coming earthquake. He will also check simple instruments in his cellar, measuring the Earth's tilt and the temperature of the ground. It'll all be noted down. Only in China is society sufficiently organized to correlate this kind of information. 24 hours a day, duty officers stand by for calls from people like that schoolmaster and put together the clues that may predict an earthquake and forewarn them of disaster. When an unpredicted quake hit the coal mining city of Tangshan in 1976, the effects were appalling. Nearly 500,000 people killed or injured, some drowned, some trapped, some crushed to death. It's no surprise that the Chinese have traditionally respected the living forces of the earth. But why wasn't this earthquake predicted? Perhaps it was because there were so few peasants living in Tangshan. It's a mining town. A year before, the Haicheng earthquake had been predicted to the nearest 24 hours, and the entire population evacuated. The peasants had warned the authorities of strange animal behavior 10 months beforehand, and helped to prevent another disaster. The Beijing Seismic Center covers the Tangshan region. As it happens, a 5.2 tremor on the Richter scale had been recorded here shortly before we filmed. The first steps they took were to see if anyone was hurt. Then the epicenter was plotted and the complete details recorded in case there were aftershocks. On this occasion, happily, no damage was done.
上方山26，差不多25.6。
哎，地震局吧，我值班室啊，报一数据啊，刚才14点28分05秒。
This building houses the Chengdu Regional Seismology Bureau in the southwest. Clerks sift through a mountain of reports received every day by post. The routine seismograph readings, the temperature of the ground, the behavior of the deer and the chickens. From this information, they can begin the careful job of prediction. It's as if these seismologists were taking the pulse of the earth, noting down its bodily signs, deducing its health from the way it looks. This patient work, like that of a careful doctor, may mean hundreds of lives saved. As in medicine, prevention is better than cure. Of course, this work also entails a staggering bureaucracy. All the records are annotated and then kept. They've been doing this for a very long time. On the wall is a map showing earthquakes as circles. Green circles mark older ones, going back as far as 700 BC. Orange circles mark earthquakes since 1900. Keeping track of all this information since the time of the Han Dynasty has been a very large task. It's perhaps not surprising that the Chinese invented paper, because they certainly invented the idea of a civil service. This committee would not have been out of place in Confucian times. It has been engaged for 4 years on compiling the definitive historical encyclopedia of Chinese earthquakes over the last 2,700 years.
郡国27，这都是属于就是没有缺址的，没有缺址地名的。
他书上就这么笼统一句话，哎，你就现在不好确址。
The Chinese became wise because they committed things to paper in the past. Indeed, printing was used early on for popular almanacs and encyclopedias, both in classical Chinese and in the frontier languages. The civil service was quick to pick up the new inventions of paper and printing. By controlling what was printed, they could control the curriculum of education and decide who learned what. In the field of seismology, there's an unbroken record of almost 3,000 years of Chinese scholarship.
这个很好一个，这个是墓碑，
这是道光30年8月，
跟那个是一个，跟刚才第一章是一个地震。
这个内容不一样啊，就是说这个人呢，地震震死的，他地震震死的，地震打死的，哎，所以咱们这个道观。
Once again, in this field, the Chinese led the world technically as well as intellectually. They invented the world's first seismoscope in 132 AD, and a reconstruction of it is on view in Beijing. Since all science was in the service of the emperor, the motif is a dragon with a ball in its mouth. It's still not clear exactly how this machine worked, but in principle, below each dragon's head was a frog with its mouth open. If an earthquake happened to the south, then the south-facing dragon dropped its ball into the frog's mouth. Apparently it worked very well. But the Chinese cosmos had three parts, not only man and the earth, but the heavens. This is the oldest surviving observatory in China, completed in 1276 AD in Henan province. When the sun shone through the central window, it would cast a rectangular shadow. The lower the sun, the longer the shadow on the measuring block. At this observatory, the length of the year was calculated to 4 decimal points, 365.2425 days. Very accurate indeed. Until the 14th century, Chinese technology was superior to European in almost every field. Their instruments particularly were exquisite. These are bronze armillary spheres, used to observe, calculate and record the position of the stars in each constellation. Each star was like an acupuncture point in the body of the sky. Invisible lines of force joined stars into constellations. The sky was like a body. The links between heaven, earth and man were as yet unbroken. But here lay the downfall of classical Chinese science. Many cultures have considered celestial events to be ominous if they're hard to predict. Solar eclipses, for example, or the arrival of comets. But the Chinese considered the cycles of heaven and earth to be inextricably bound up with those of man. A major illness in the sky, a solar eclipse perhaps, meant a political or military catastrophe was inevitable. Astronomy was forever bound up with astrology in the public mind, and that, especially in the Cultural Revolution, made it deeply suspect. The traditional links between heaven, earth and man fell foul of modern science and politics. You couldn't prove them scientifically, and they weren't useful politically. It was far more practical to fire lasers at a satellite than to worry about the influence of distant constellations. China is not a rich country. The authorities feel they can no longer afford any science that is superstitious or speculative or even too theoretical. Hence the attraction of lasers. The forces of the cosmos must be made to work for their living in the new China. Energy isn't something that vaguely infuses the universe. It's what cuts through fabrics. Lasers are one of the 8 scientific areas given special priority since 1978. The others are agriculture, energy, computers, space, new materials, high-energy physics, and genetic engineering. All very practical. The Chinese have become good at growing crystals, too. This sort of science is worth the investment. But modern science has not always been so popular in communist China. Countless scientists were humiliated, beaten up, or sent to the fields during the 10 long years of the Cultural Revolution. Most science was seen as Western, decadent, un-Chinese. This is a laser tokamak device in Shanghai, part of the worldwide research into nuclear fusion. This kind of experiment would have been impossible during the Cultural Revolution. The search for nuclear fusion is practical in one sense. It could solve China's energy problems overnight. But the experiment may never be perfected, at least not at the Institute of Physics in Beijing. Here they're also working on fusion like their colleagues in Shanghai, but with less success. Chinese science slipped back 10 years under the Cultural Revolution. But that can't be blamed for everything. Still today, there's too little cooperation between the different academic institutes in China. Scientists in Beijing may have no idea what the people in Shanghai are doing. And, as in the West, a high proportion of money for science is spent on defense. Under the Cultural Revolution, spending on defense was one area that was not cut. In the 1960s and 70s, China triumphantly exploded its own atomic bombs. It was heralded as a massive achievement, which for a poor country it was. But at what cost?
China exploded an atom bomb in the western region of China on October 16, 1964, and thereby successfully conducted its first nuclear test. The success of this test was due to the hard work and the great coordinated efforts of China's workers, engineering, technical and scientific personnel, and all working personnel engaged in building up China's national defenses, as well as...
This is another victory for Mao Zedong's thought. The final decisive battle will be one of close combat at 100 or 200 meters. At that time, it will depend on who is tougher, who can take a position, who can hold it, who dares to see red on his bayonet. We have the spiritual atomic bomb, which is impossible for the enemy to acquire, and we also have the material atomic bomb. No enemy can defeat it. If the imperialists dare to impose war on our heads,
the Chinese have made extraordinary advances in this century. When the first aeroplane appeared in the sky over China, it was still a feudal state, ruled by a dragon emperor. It is difficult to realize how far their understanding of science has come in the last 75 years. Great efforts still have to be made to convince the average Chinese that practical science is not essentially foreign. Here, students are being acclimatized to the altitudes of Tibet. That sort of science has a clear purpose. But the Cultural Revolution is hard to forget. For 10 years, clever people were pilloried. Many of them still take care not to appear too clever today. And what was once the pride of China, the world's first civil service, has become a vast bureaucracy that's proving difficult to cut back. Red tape in the world of science is enormous. It's impossible to get rid of senior people, even if they're incompetent. China's greatest hope lies in its teachers. Only they can persuade the young to believe in science and not to be too careful and cynical. Happily, China has a great tradition of respect for teachers. That respect has lasted 1,500 years at the Songyang Academy. For 1,300 years, China has had a centralized examination system. Today, in addition, the syllabus and timetable for every school are handed down from Beijing. What they teach in China is certainty. The Chinese have always said, that you only learn something by reciting it or doing it over and over again until suddenly you understand it. A student of wushu or kung fu is taught to learn by imitating, by doing. Only then, eventually, will he feel the vital energy of the universe, qi, running through his body. Watch it, then do it, then understand. Here at the Temple of Shaolin, the art of Kung Fu was first practiced. It is still being taught in the same way, still being perfected. Outside the Temple of Shaolin are the gravestones of the monks who have taught Kung Fu over the past 5 centuries. They are still revered for their wisdom. It is impossible to tell whether the long history of Chinese thought, of ancient beliefs in qi or yin and yang, of deep respect for the teacher, whether all this will make it easier or harder for them to cope with the problems of the future. But it is clear that their understanding of life on Earth is still profoundly influenced by their history. The enormous, unpredictable, irascible Yangtze River divides Nanjing, the old capital of China, into 2 neat halves. The new industrial part is on the north bank and the old city is on the south bank. And that's where most of the 3 million people live. Once you're south of the river, southern China, warm China, officially starts. So there's no heating in the houses or flats, even though it can be as bitterly cold in winter as it can be boiling in the summer. Like the rest of China, Nanjing has a young population, about half of them under the age of 21. In the next 18 years, it's estimated that an annual average of 20 million Chinese will get married, despite the fact that they've raised the marriage age for girls to 20 and for men to 23. The wife and mother who lives here is called Gu Lingping. She married when she was 25. She has a baby daughter of 1 and all the modest belongings that a young married couple in China could reasonably expect. She lives here with her husband, Chai Swanji, but they've both had problems with their marriage, left the flat and gone back temporarily to live with their mothers. He works as a lathe setter and operator in a small factory that turns out hydraulic pit props. The couple met here. They were both apprentices. Now she's left her husband and the machine shop and sells clothes in this general store. The manageress, who's just behind her, has been part of a mediating team that's trying to get the two back together. When they were apprentices, the girl and her husband were trained by the foreman who runs the machine shop, Master Wang. As soon as the baby was born, the marriage went on to the rocks, and Master Wang tried to patch it up. When that didn't work, the case was referred back to the mediating committee in the neighborhood where the two live, in the southwest of the city. There are about 800,000 mediating committees in China, and they're said to handle 15 times more cases than the civil courts do. The chairwoman of the neighborhood committee, Madame Luo, lives here. She's 63 and retired from her job as a cook in a factory crèche. As her certificate shows, she's been involved in mediating work for more than 20 years and has lived in the district for 30. In a neighborhood not far away lives Chen Li. He's a civil court judge of 51. He has 2 married daughters, a son, and a much-loved granddaughter. He trained as a teacher, then when he was 22, switched to the law. He specializes in mediating and divorce cases. Under the marriage laws, divorce is possible but frowned on. There's tremendous social pressure from families, the neighbors, and workmates aimed at keeping marriages together. Harmony is everything. But that means the harmony between work units, neighborhood groups, or families, rather than that between a man and a woman. And it's at this point that our story really starts. This pile of stones has been built for a special purpose. Each stone has been separately placed by a supplicant, hoping to bring about the birth of a baby son or grandson. They're mostly put there by women who climb the holy mountain of Taishan in search of the one possession most desired by a family, a baby boy, a son and heir, someone to carry on the family name and someone to look after the parents and grandparents in their old age. There's a great anonymity in the idea of 1,000 million people. The Chinese can easily seem, to a Westerner, a mere mass of indistinguishable individuals. In reality, each human atom is different and exists as part of the most important constellation in China, the family. There are about 300 million families in China, and each of them, because of the population explosion, is rationed to 1 child. So it has to be a boy first time. Throughout China, a huge propaganda campaign is on every available horn to try and keep the families down to 1. And with the campaign go rewards for the successful and penalties for those who exceed the norm. In human terms, this means that half of China's young families are in a vice. What happens when the coin comes down tails and the 1 child that the state allows them turns out to be a girl? Well, this was exactly what did happen to Gu Lingping and Chai Swanji. Their girl, like all new babies in Nanjing, was born in the maternity hospital. In the countryside, where the confinements are less controlled, newspapers carried disturbing reports of baby girls being killed at birth. In the past, this was so common that some rivers would have notices saying, "No girl babies to be drowned here." In China, the word infanticide means to suffocate by drowning. When she got home 10 days after the caesarean, Gu Lingping became convinced that her husband was trying to kill the baby. In the end, things got so bad that she tried repeatedly to get a divorce. The couple went through endless mediating sessions in the factory, the neighborhood committee, and the civil court. Nothing seemed to work, but they agreed to have one final try before the divorce was granted. Judge Chen from the civil court was put in charge, and old Madame Luo and Master Wang were brought in to help. So was the manageress of the store where the girl worked. In China, it's traditional to solve disputes through local mediators. The tradition's an ancient one. In the past, if you could, you would avoid contact with the potentially corrupt, venal, and dangerous magistrate. Nowadays, the civil courts are not corrupt, but they are few, and the mediators deal with so many cases that the courts would be overwhelmed if they had to cope with them all. This, then, is social law, informal law in action.
所住的这个街道的居民调解委员会的主任一起来听听你们对这个家庭问题处理的意见，特别是你顾灵平，你是原告，对吧？那么你提出离婚有哪些理由？你对你的爱人蔡玄志有哪些意见？你们有哪些矛盾？
第一，从8一年7月份开始的。7月7号，因为我生了一个女儿，首先蔡玄第一天生下来以后，他晓得是个女儿了，对我态度相当恶劣，拿我不当一个他作为是个妻子，对不对？在生下来以前第一句话，根本也不问你是道口还是什么好还没好，对不对？还是你道口疼不疼怎么样？而且就问你为什么要求剖腹，不会到外头来摧残嘛，对不对？说摧残2天3天左右，而且我就跟他讲了，对不对？我说我生不下来，对不对？也不是我自己决定要求剖腹的，对不对？是根据医生根据我这种病情才要求剖腹，而且他就讲了说，那你就给他出来刮就是了，刮2个星期，说催2个星期就是了。
你稍微讲慢一点，让我们能够听得清楚
而他在医院的9天里就是这种样子对待我，而且还跟我讲说什么，小孩以后生病了你就不要带他治说，他是意思就是恨不得我不要抱这个小孩，好像在这个家里头，小孩哭了你最起码9天都看见了，你要来看看这个小孩到底怎么样了而且有时候我也看看这小孩到底像什么东西，他根本也不吱声。明天我要出院了我也跟他讲，我说他说我说要用3轮车接回家，他还也说什么自行车就可以行了，还用什么3轮车说自行车推就行了，而且我道口是剖腹产生下来的，对不对？到了家以后，我妈带我扶了3楼，我妈实在是吃不消了，叫他扶一下子，他就用手一抓一把，嘟就往上拎。你说这样子，我道口怎么能拿我简直是不当一个人对待？我妈就骂我说：“你还不如早死呢，死了算了呢。从来也没得看过这种男人对待自己的妻子啦。”他就大发牢骚，又骂我妈说好吵，说你滚，他说你走。后来我妈就忍到气下来了。后来在这个情况下，我就哭得不得了，他就掉脸就走，门一关，咚一下子掉脸就跑。而且有一次我最记得在月子里头，他对小孩是，我说你把小孩哭了，你把小孩应该要把他摇，对不对？他说他摇都不摇，他就咚，后来他没得办法，只好要咚摇，把小孩嘛差到要给他要闷死。翻过来，那既然那里小孩车子也这么宽，对不对？他如果想摇小孩，能不能也要翻过来对不对？他根本没有眼里头根本没有这个小孩，对不对？他恨不得我要跟他一条心，在月子里把小孩闷死才好。
What could drive him to murder? The hope of a son. He was so set on a boy child that he wouldn't apply for what's called a one-child certificate, though this meant that he would miss out on all the benefits that go with it, like an extra 12% pay or a cash bonus, extra housing space, free health care and free schooling for the child. In the countryside, he'd have got an extra private plot of land to grow food on, and a bigger pension when he retired. But once you've signed the one-child pledge, there's no backing out without severe penalties for both parents. Salary cuts, demotion at work for the man, and quite possibly compulsory sterilization for the woman.
这一天，他赶快就拒绝了，说我不领了，要以我个人为主。我以为我到底还认识人，好吧？后来我自己在单位领到一个证，他看到我领到终身制一证了，怪很生气，晓得我也不会生了，对不对？晓得我到单位去过了，反正晓得我也领到一个证了，所以不会生了。而且现在是新社会，也不是旧社会，男女都一样，对不对？为什么我们妇女就应该要受的这种压迫呢？对不对？现在是新社会了，就是我今年没有工作，我说到啥，我也把这小孩要抚养大，对不对？所以我现在一切都根本也不考虑，我现在就考虑到为了小孩，如果小孩跟他在一起生活的话，如果小孩根本也不能得到他的保障，一定会得不到保障，很可能也会给他害死。所以我要坚决要跟他离婚，只有跳出这口苦境，对不对？
那就是说，你考虑到两方面，是不是？一个就是大应生第二胎，这是不可能的啊！你认为蔡玄子主要的他有重男轻女的思想，生了孩子这个女孩子以后，你刚才讲的那一系列的都是好像围绕着这个生了女孩了。蔡玄子啊，你啊，可以答辩啊，你讲吧。
老说对了，儿啊，当时医院呢开了开了这个培课证，培课证这等于第4天晚上了，我已经就是说已经第4天没睡觉了。当时我提出来，我说今天我不能陪你了，我要回去休息一下子。
而且人家旁边的人就是连同志都能认真的管理好自己的妻子，你为什么不能管理啊？
医生怜悯点时间。
医生点是叫你暂时怜悯，对不对？而且是暂时怜悯，对不对？而且暂时怜悯我是可以理解的。你说你陪到3天3夜，对不对？既然你说你陪到3天，在这个3天3夜之间陪，你完全是为听我家人讲说，他也哭了一下子说，那你完全是为好像说怪，肯定是儿子肯定要死了，肯定你完全是为了这个而哭的，告诉你讲，你不是为了我这个身体而哭。
但是因为我不知道你是哪个时候，我怎么可能呢？
哎呀，要小便了，这3天当中啊，人家小便根本不能要死了的，所以你自己锻炼而走。以后我们人不在了还怎么办？这是你在这个3天之内讲的。
他说3天对他不好，他3天做产房出来以后，就剖腹产以后，我带他换就带他换的，全我带他换的，不行。
这个你完全是在给我诬赖，就你一定要换过几次啊？你要换过几次啊？
就是唯一次吵了，我说好，那换。
就完全是要换一次，对不对？
原告人啊，指控的有重男轻女的思想。那么现在呢，你刚才回答了一些啊，那么现在呢，你总的意思就是你没有重男轻女的思想，你举出例子来啊，来说服我们，也说服你的妻子。
每天早晨我是呢，等于4、5点钟4点钟左右就要起来，4点钟起来以后呢，晨起来第一件事情，牙脸都不会梳的，啊，也不洗脸，也不先刷牙，先到菜场去。菜场去啊，第一句话就问他，今天你要吃什么菜？所以从多方面照顾他。
顾林平还是提出来要跟你离婚啊，你态度怎么样呢？你看还是离婚还是不离婚呢？是不是？
没有，我当时是没有谈。后来呢，这个通过
就是现在目
前我还没有离婚，还没有这种想法。
就到现在为止，你还是不想离婚的，是这个意思啊？
不是。
是
我的意思是什么意思啊？就是之前呢，有单位他们单位和我们单位领导做了很多工作，我感觉到从多方面讲呢，就是我可能他也有误解，我也有误解的地方。
我们用不着果子，对不对啊？纸总包不住火，对不对啊？只有双方在交流思想，才能最后统一认识、交流感情，不这么个意思吗？啊，哎，就是你对他还有什么意见，也可以提的，啊。
我对他意见呢，就是说，我到底开了那么多趟，他是丝毫没得这个 回信的一个。
在你们夫妻分居的这个1年的时间当中，对不对啊？你到你的妻子的妈妈家，因为你妻子住在她妈妈那里了，去了好多次，去了多少次啊？
去了
3、4次啊。是真正诚意去的，有的呢是反正因为你们的师傅啊，还有居民干部啊、群众代表都给你们调解过的，在下面调解的，也可能呢被派去的，对不对啊？事先没有解决问题，你这个实事求是讲清楚。
儿啊，从我的印象没得。
你从你带回来，你进来门是怎么样的态度？而且你进来就是算是大个讲，对不对？表姐怎么全力抱小孩？你现在？
就不是我讲的是呀，对不对？
全力抱小孩，他现在根本不要这小孩。
他是爸爸嘛，他爸爸可以
而且你在这个当中还送偶家人来个挑，对不对？他根本1年当中他根本不要这个小孩，他有什么权利抱小孩啊？
至于小孩没拿矛盾，我跟你讲，我才跟你讲，就是到你家去的问题。
至于小孩没得矛盾，你为什么不送呢？那些问题，你为什么？
之前只有矛盾，我仍然会照顾小孩，我才到你家去讲。
矛盾就是矛盾过以后，你送过一次，后来就没得送了。告诉你讲，你后来就没得送了。9月19号你就开始没得送了。
那东西拖回家以后就不送了，一点不送。
哎，那你为什么不送呢？小孩有没得罪啊？你说你喜欢小孩，你可以表现；你说你喜欢小孩，你把你表现在什么地方，你可以摆一下。
吵架以后，小孩说丢了还是什么，天天什么？
哎，现在不谈9月，我现在谈这个小孩。把你是给我处理，而且你不是给小孩处理。你要你这里面，
正因为有了
你这里面的小孩你里面的习惯就代表就喜欢这个小孩了，对不对？
哎
呀，我跟你讲的。
我们这样子，来，我们这样子闹不清了啊！你看这样子还是一个个的讲，这个事情总是要慢慢解决的啊！我们一口吃个馒头也吃不掉。
尽管我们俩有矛盾，双方领导也在做工作，我说我们俩出去谈一谈，他给我不谈，否决了。
拒绝跟你这个谈和好，是吧？
是我到家去多少趟，他家人都不给我进他家。
你到他家，你得去好多趟，他家人都不给你进门。那这样子那么你们除掉个人的你们双方面的这个因素以外，你们家庭互相的家庭你们感觉到对你这个夫妻感情上是不是起一定的作用一定的影响呢？就是说你对他家里的到底对你丈母娘也好对他的哥哥也好，是不是有些什么意见呢？其中哪些呢？你说说看呢？你先听。
就是说我们夫妻吵架，作为我丈母娘应该就是说把女儿送回来，这样就不存在了再闹的事。所以我估计可能他母亲在外面在闯。
估计他母亲在挑拨你们的关系那说人听听这个问题可能是个笑的。他估计就是他猜想，就是女方的母亲在他这个夫妻关系上呢起这个挑拨离间的作用。这一条很重要，对不对好，你还对他这个母亲还有什么意见？你们当时结婚的时候，他母亲还同意
他母亲坚决反对。
当时结婚的时候是不是这个情况？你应该知道这个情况
我就到家里面跟他母亲、跟女方的母亲呢做了一些工作，最后呢，他母亲呢也同意了。
当时他们俩谈恋爱，他母亲就是小姑的女方的母亲不太同意。你说他父亲也到你姑姑的单位里去捞去了，对吧？到你姑姑单位。
在这之前，我还以为他家父母亲等于是肯定是比较好的。结果后来发展以后，他家父亲带着他一道去，而且还是他家父亲自己讲的，这个我才怀疑到而且他们俩儿子跟父亲完全是同好戏的，他们俩对不对？肯定是，也是同好戏的。
这个事情
为什么他不跟他讲？就是叫他把矛盾闹出来。
你等等。这个事情呢，他刚才讲的这个情况，说是他们俩跟他父亲同好气去整他。
因为我是他跟我讲说，我父亲同意的，所以说我才给他去对证。
你夫妻两个，你找他去，你跑到人家姑姑个单位门口去干什么事？人家姑姑也不是你的什么夫妻，对不对而且呢，你把你父亲拖着去干什么事？这不明摆着叫他想你们同好气来整我姑姑，给我姑姑丢人，然后呢叫我姑姑回来再来弄我，就搞得就不是一塌糊涂了吗？ 因为人要脸呐，树要皮啊，把个你一起撕破掉了，还有什么意思呢？对不对啊？你搞不起来了，这个夫妻之间，对不对啊？
在结婚啊之后啊，他们的感情是很好。我经常啊看到他们一路来一路去，这是事实。自从生了孩子以后，啊，发生了误解。我啊看过一部电影《刘双双》，上面有4句话：天上下雨鸡下牛，小夫妻2个吵架不记仇，白天吃过饭，晚上各睡1个枕。再问小蔡，你以前小姑在家的时候，你家庭的是一个什么样的？现在是一个什么样的情况？记账了也不少，甚至于连从你以后孩子摆到都上面。小蔡同志啊，你应该要想一想，你看看你本来是一个可以讲啊漂漂亮亮的一个小伙子，现在呢头发长得这么长，胡子又白怪，你不要多心啊，小蔡啊，你真像个老头了。对你的小孩子后果考虑不严。年轻有句俗语啊，人教一两少儿女，不教儿女少一两。到了离婚之后，少一两的儿女是不好过的。
现在离不离婚，我们很难下这个结论。那么今天呢，先谈到这里，因为你们牵涉到一些问题呢，我们还进行一些调查。你们讲的双方面家长在里面起的一些作用、一些影响呢，我们还要跟你们双方的家长、父母啊、哥哥来交谈走访。我们不强加于你们，结婚自由，离婚同样的自由自主啊，这婚姻法规定的很清楚，完全由你们2个人的意志。到你们家再说啊。
At this point, even though the mediators tried to put a brave front on it, the case looked pretty hopeless. Gu Lingping and the baby were living with her mother, and Chai Swanji, the husband, was back with his mother. In China, mothers-in-law are a power in the land and always have been. They are the informal heads of the family, the psychic powerhouses that animate and often dominate the males of the clan. Mother-in-law jokes are common, but they're told more by the women than by the men. On the surface, Chinese men seem to have things very much their own way. Although both sexes are equal in law, most men seem to have a sneaking feeling that women aren't quite as clever as they are, and that they are in some ways inferior. Perhaps it's a hangover from a feudal past where parents could literally buy a wife for their son. The girl would legally become the property of the new family. Her duty was to care for them all and to produce the eagerly awaited son and heir. By now, the mediators had trodden the path to Gu Lingping's mother's house so many times that the neighbors had almost got used to them. But the very fact that the couple were on the edge of divorce was a matter of great shame for the whole family. The wife was living here with her baby, her mother who is widowed, her grandmother, and her brother who is now the head of the family and unmarried. It's a two-roomed house. The mediators sensed that if the case was to be resolved, they had to concentrate as much on the mothers-in-law as on the couple themselves. So the judge focused all his powers of persuasion on Gu's mother.
你看看他们这个夫妻2个啊，原来感情怎么样？
女人没有生小孩一些还是可以的，
啊，
还是很好的。
那个时候他们两个谈恋爱谈多长时间啊？跟你女婿
谈了好几年呢。
谈了有多长啊？
那个有3年吧。
有快3年了是吧？那么那个时候你，对你这个女儿跟女婿这个婚事啊，你怎么看法呢？
那个辰光呢？
开始谈恋爱的。
不容易。为什么呢？他因为呢，许多事情，现在国家好找，又不准许早谈恋爱，要完婚，对吧？我们应该听的这个。事实上，你技术还没有学好，应该一门要先学技术。所以呢，我是没得同意，年纪太轻，22岁才，我是没得同意。
那么结婚以后，我们就集中在结婚以后这一段来讲了。你们到底对小蔡有些什么意见呢？
没得意见。
哎，实事求是的，啊，不要来气。
你生男生女，医院里向我就想了，你不能表面也要告诉自己。应该呢，男人爱护妻子呢。在难产的时候，最困难的时候，你男人不爱护是谁爱护？这是我一个意见。还有一个意见就是我认为他没得道德。他是财务是你爱人，他既然刀口发现了，你为什么不好好的爱护他？到回来的时候呢，他因为刀口里面塞了纱布，弄的这个怀孕呢，弄的呢要得他刮掉，因为不能打麻药针，疼得不得了。他来呢跑不动路，跟他讲，我讲的小菜你得他扶一把，他拉了羞抱。哎呀，我很惊慌下哦，我说不对，我说小菜你放手啊！我说你不要拉了，他吃不消，他受不了这个你情，他就上来一困了上了就。黑哦，像个黄豆这么大哦，记得什么狠心的男人没得口几个啊！我说对你这个样子，我说他几个句，你好吵，你好跳，我讲我们
你女婿讲你好吵，
我好跳，好跳啊！他家庭啊有挑拨的关系，为什么呢？
他家的哪一个呢？
他家他母亲，
他的父亲和母亲，
他母亲。其实说，我听说他爸爸呢讲过的，他呢大肚子的时候，我告诉你听，我今天呢也彻底讲了一下，他肚子大的时候，到东到西，跟所有人说他是内娃，他门口去，他爸爸妈妈门口也说他呢是一定内娃，所以他父亲呢养了70几在农场，在他农郊区，结果后来生了女儿也来也不来，拿了1只鸡来。满月等他来，他也不来，是啊，是的。还有呢，人读女症的时候，邢志宇他父亲讲过，说是他断种了，是吧？断种了。
For the mediators, this was the eye of the storm, the collision point for the two families. Unless they could get the families together, there was no hope of reconciliation for the couple. So it was to the husband's father, and above all to his mother, that they had to go next. If, on a Sunday, you sit still in the center of Nanjing's biggest park, then this is the sight that greets your telephoto lens. An endless parade of immaculate toddlers being put through their paces by proud parents. You'd never guess that behind all this fecundity was a state policy that necessarily results in a large percentage of all conceptions ending in abortion. In Tianjin, the figure was reported by the authorities to be as high as 60%. Why is this draconian one-child policy necessary? According to the official calculations, there are more than 1,000 million Chinese. And if every family had 3 children, then by the year 2000, the population would have increased by 40%. And in 100 years, it would equal the present entire world population, 4,000 million people. China is vast, but even today it has to feed 25% of the world's population from 7% of the world's arable land. These are the realities at the back of the minds of the countless bureaucrats and part-time helpers struggling to stave off the baby boom of the 80s. And doubtless these were part of the thoughts in Judge Chen's mind as he carried on the attempt to reunite this one-child family. For, beside all the other considerations, a divorce would have meant that Chai was free to remarry and try for a son again. Chai was a different, more confident person when he was with his parents. To the outside eye, it was the father who did most of the talking, but it was the mother who really decided what went on.
一开始想生个孙子，哪一家都讲啊，恭喜你生个孙子，对不对啊？啊，这个也是老百姓当中我们啊传统的习惯嘛。
媳妇生小孩，生男孩女孩，我没有说是哪把这个女孩子说怎么怎样的，我一直嘛，这个男孩女孩总都是我蔡家人，我总是这样想。
那么后来为什么是吵的呢？
说开始这你怎么闹的，法官，我是一点点不了解。
啊，就是小姑这个妈妈，你媳妇这个妈妈，还有什么意见吗？
我对她没有什么意见。
你妈吵过没有？
我没有。
你对你家这个亲家还有什么意见呢？
对亲家嘛，就管着带着女儿吵，吵得我心里头有点不大个。
不高兴。
哎。
你还骂他的？
我也讲了一句。
你骂没骂他？我们
骂他，我说你不要来动手动脚的，我讲，你要这那我不让你，我讲。
啊。
这话讲的。
啊，你讲，你不要动手动脚啊。
哎，我讲的。
不要动手动脚的。
他说指我讲的。
你家媳妇现在要跟你家儿子离婚，你们老两口子看看，到底还是离好还是不离好？我们征求你们意见。
这个我是这样说吧。我是呢不希望这个儿子跟媳妇离婚。
我的意见嘛，最好是不离。
最好不离。就是政府也好，他这个单位里头也好，师傅，居民委会主任那边的啊，女方的这个组织上，这个意见跟你们是一致的。所以看看呢，打算怎么样解决这个矛盾。人家讲这个重男轻女这个话不是没得原因的。你不生孩子以前，小蔡是陪了3天3夜。孩子一生下来是个女孩子，小蔡不问了，才生下来孩子，你这个地方都要跑了，而且是难产。哎，我们就在这个地方研究了，对吧？你说你在这点上做的哈，是不是有缺点？
但是我3天基本上没怎么吃饭呢。
你再没吃饭，他吃饭了没有？他吃饭没有？你的妻子还吃饭了没有？
他在厂里，他有病，胡子推进去。那我别的承受我病
哦，那就是啦。
疼得像什么样子的？
他是不是破肚子了？我刚才问的，你还破肚子呢？就是噻，你不过就是累一点啊。他大量的失血啊，他流血很多的，是不是啊？我就问你，你在这方面啊，我不勉强你去啊认识还是有错没得错。我们不是追究责任，我们是呢把这个事情呢是非要弄清楚。
不管是男是女都要这么说。
我跟你讲，生男孩你走嘛，就没得这个异性啦。生了女孩这一走嘛，这个异性就出来了。
真没生出跟小姑娘来讲，我们是希望生个儿子。
没讲。
啊。
没讲。是没讲过。其实他跟我讲过的，他说他一条一个店里的一个女娃，说看他都是男娃，我说管他男娃，你要不管他。
你讲随便。
哎，我也随便的，反正我，其实我说他要推他回家吃，我推他回去吃。
你的缺点在于什么地方呢？就是你光想到你这一方面累了，你没想到你的妻子呢，比你更累，比你更受苦。人家讲养儿才晓得报娘恩呐，这句话对不对啊？我们中国一句古话嘛。
要让小蔡体会到一个小孩啊是不容易的，他妈妈呢又要老又要小又要服侍个坐月子的。一个家里不容易啊，从早忙到晚，你不体谅到这一点，还从头从脑的。
那个时候他们怎么走的？后来不是照顾你家爱人坐月子吗？他们怎么走的呢？
他们给我气的，那干嘛？你怎么不思考你找死啊？你害人！ 是吧？但是我不同意，你非要来，你非要同意，监狱骂，骂了以后呢，我想怎么好骂我嘛，我也不开心，我只要吵你们到外面吵，不要在这吵。咱儿子丈母娘被我家里不支呢。
另外一个，你家老丈母娘就是千错万错嘛，就是有不对的地方嘛。她60岁了，老太太了，丈母娘到你家就是客来，你为什么是就对她那么个态度呢？难为情啊！那天经过居民上调解以后，组织上调解以后，给小孩买的衣裳了，
蛮漂亮的衣服。
蛮漂亮的呢，真是蛮漂亮的。
蛮漂亮的。
你看看他。
漂亮吗？漂亮。
那，陆主任，你看看，是吧？买了这个衣裳了。
那家爷爷奶奶不。
衣裳还在你家放到你，人家晓得，你要带着要讲清楚。我不是不喜欢这个孙女儿哎。我们还是喜欢，你看我们买的衣裳，不过嘛，因为那是个老别扭了，就不好意思来拿。
哎，对。
你最近看到了？
最近就是在那花园里，
哦。现在看。你们好长时间没看了吧？哎，小闭嘴！我跟你讲，就像你家儿子，你家那个孙女儿就像聪明的很呢，我跟你说。好吧，我们今天就这样子，好不好？那我们就不吃西瓜，不吃西瓜，不吃西瓜。不客气，不客气。好，谢谢，我们心领了，好。哎不，又是主任。
你像我3个儿子，2房媳妇，2个女儿，2个女婿，我们哪个不得毛的嘛，也有毛的，正确对待呀，正确对待。
好，
There appeared to be little room here for questions that marriage guidance counselors in the West might have asked, like, why did you get married? Or, is your sex life a happy one? Or, how did you both get on during the pregnancy? The emphasis is on the isolation and labeling of more concrete, more practical events that can be identified and apologized for. By now, as the mediators brought the families together in the neighborhood committee meeting house, they had the scent of victory in their nostrils. It was the first time that the two families had sat round a table together, and obviously old Madame Luo's words to the husband had struck home. He'd spruced himself up, had a shave, and cut his moustache off. But his wife seemed still quite determined not to live with him until he'd had a change of heart.
最主要的，第一，没得达到财前日再生第2胎了。如果这个问题没想透，说老实话，我还是不能跟他在一起过。
对不对？这边欢迎和我们到你家去进行家访，这些问题看到了是吧？这个我们心里有数了。小姑呢还不怎么反省，对这个问题呢你反看。
作为本人嘛，就是说，还是相信政府好走，只生一个孩子，绝不生第2个。
你那有没有想生2个想法？
以前是有这种打算，当然了，通过多少年教育啊。
还有最主要的还有他们家长，对不对？在这个问题上一定要相同，因为他们共同都有这个愿望，就想生第2胎，对不对？因为嘛生个男娃嘛，对不对？对他们等于有的几点，大家主要意思。现在我主要也考虑到他们的家长也要在这个问题上一定要相同。
因为我们国家呢有个传统，希望生个男孩。作为小崽他们家里面或者小崽本人想生个男孩呢，这个呢也我讲呢也情有可原，这个心情可以理解。当然生的厉害呢，从思想上说应该感到是一样，男女都是一样。对这个问题以前我们调解几次呢，特别重视这个问题。问的小崽的父亲和母亲，他们态度呢，一直还是比较明朗的。小崽爸爸也跟我讲，他说男女都一样嘛，我家里面有男孩有女孩，男孩不见得比女孩贴心，女孩子反而贴心。希望你不要有这个想法。
你看看小蔡啊，刚才那小姑讲了，你看你在你处理这个家庭问题上有哪些缺点吧？
我这个作为亲戚呢，就说那点在参谋员啊，这个
配到3年3夜。但是作为小姑嘛，肯定要叫配的比较好。当然我觉得我太多男人可能不好，还是比较慎重一点。有时候，哎，喊你们别耍了，我回家睡觉去。
3年3夜睡觉，我回家睡
觉。睡觉去了。但是我就花了大，就像刚才这样讲的，也是没带小。
还有你对你老丈母娘呢？
但通过这个事情嘛，自己也学习要行，把自己岳母啊，你是外婆啊，当成自己来了，和当成自己母亲来处理问题，将来问题解决问题，恐怕就好多了。
学习表现还是很好的。
你对你哥哥呢，还有什么做的不大妥当的地方啊？
另外就是到这个单位当中，所以他的体面不好看，自己好像吃个气，但实际上呢，造成对方呢隔阂更大。不管怎么样，还是哥哥，比我大了几岁，哎呀，这今后的生活还是要最起码的够还是够，再看问题。
老岳母看看呢？
这个发生矛盾嘛，也蛮密的呢，有误会的地方。倾听倾听呢，小菜表态呢还是不错的。只要今后很好的过，汲取教训，那就没得什么好放心了，我们就好放心了。我呢同意呢他们说，在我来讲呢，也应该呢把我女儿呢教育好。
小哥哥，看看你还有什么意见啊？
刚才嘛，反正都已经表了太多儿女问题，这就是基础。现在嘛，这个国共两党这个对立的政党现在还在争取搞这个3次国共合作的准备。何况小家庭呢，在这个不愉快的往事当中吧，和这个小蔡的父母亲嘛，也闹过一些矛盾，闹过一些隔阂。但以后只要问题解决了，你们好好在一起过日子了，希望你对待他们的父母亲呢，也要像对待自己父母亲一样，要像把当自己当人。这个尊长是我们这个整个中华民族的一个优良传统，我们大家要好好保持下去。
小姑啊，你感觉到你在处理这个家庭问题上，处理夫妻关系这个问题上，你看你还有哪些不足的地方呢？
最主要的那是前期他得主动来上面来接老人了所以自己得也拒绝了对一些事情也不正确处理好吧所以就连着嘛也喊了几次鬼，所以这个主要嘛，我主要在气头上，所以在这个地方嘛，反正自己做的不对吧
他表示道歉啊。
然后话讲了，对，最主要嘛，我也希望在今后的生活中，对不对？小孩是国家的，对不对？我们还要共同的抚养好，对不对？在这个生第2胎的问题上，一定要在思想上要重视好，不能好像含糊的不得了。
对，反省的，刚才小蔡表过态了，反省，他是讲了，小蔡又讲了，他经过党的教育10几年了，是一个工人阶级。
这个孩子们说，岳母这样，你对着对那婆婆80多岁人，我们说她就走了，婆婆你在不在家我不晓得。那如果婆婆走，你婆婆不能走，我就跪着那个我也不能给你婆婆走。为什么？你叫那婆婆80多人回家怎么好回家呢？这些责任在于谁？在于我。养不教，父之过，这个都是我的。这是我的，我可以呢，像呢，我亲戚家可以去道歉。但是我们今天在这块也是这样。但是以后我要提出，我假如你一个人不要到那边去，要去你3口一起去。
3个人一起。
那人干你哪去我去我边。你要去你把小孩带着，那3人一起去。
3个人一起去。
你说你不要你自己骑车到那边，我这水给你喝没干走。我钱不看我，还有生女子我要看看，这个东西我们是讲，其他的不会到我们这什么。如果说我讲的不到的，还有各位双方领导给我指正，我想法改呀。
讲得蛮好啊，你这个想法都很对头的
变了吗？
高师傅啊，老婆婆看看，你还有什么意见啦？
两口好，我们我也没得意见啊。矛盾啊，都是互相合理，个性比较少。不过通过今天这个会啊，我希望啊，加强党性，克服个性啊，个性要克服，不能吹自己的意思，要怎么样就怎么样啊，无法无天那是不行的。
那么现在根据调解的情况来看，啊，顾林平，你是原告，你要不要离婚了？啊，要求啊！顾林平不要求离婚了，因此我们的调解有效。原来啊，蔡宣子已经表示我不离婚了。啊，1982年7月27号上午10点20分做了界限了，以后再也不提过去的事情。请你们签名。好，请双方家长签名。你们两个拉拉手吧。不好意思呢，表示和好了。拉拉手，拉拉手，来，咱家主动权交给你了，小蔡啊，你要主动一点。咱家拉拉手，拉拉手，拉拉手，拉拉手，好，
我就谢谢他爸爸。
好，你把这拿起来，小蔡啊，去抱孩子去。
他不能抱，等个再给。
啊，等着给他抱。收起。好，我们上车上哪里去？上这个车去。
1 year later, the camera team went back to Nanjing and called in to see how Gu and Chai and the baby were getting on. They were together in their flat and, as far as one could judge, were making a go of it. Chai was asked a final question, whether he wanted his grandchild to be a baby girl or a baby boy. But he took the back seat and it was Gu who answered first.
我意思，反正，如果他或者现在人要如果生到男的就男的，生到女的就女的吧，都一样。
现在基本上都有，你以后去都有国家负责抚养的，这好像男娃要都我们都有工作，都有退休了，就好像有点男娃女娃是差不多一样，好像无所谓的事情。
If the state wins its fight to keep the birth rate down to 1 child per family, then one huge question lurks in the background that's likely to surface sometime after the year 2000. The question is this: if there's only 1 child per family, who's going to look after the old people when they retire? And won't this break up the tight-knit family structure of China, and with it a way of life that's lasted for longer than 2,000 years?